We are live. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to CertaPay's Coffee Break number 12 of 2021. We're talking about vaccines and masks today to answer all of your questions. So we have heard you. We've been listening to your questions, and we want to do the best we can to answer them today. I'm your host, Rachel Camella, and I'm here with our moderator, Cindy Merkel, and our VP of HR, Tammy Dawson. So we have a packed house, and all of you have joined because these questions are on your mind. So we're glad you're here. I am going to remind everybody to stay muted when you come in. That helps keep the background noise down, and so we can hear. And then if you have questions, use that group chat, the Zoom chat, and you can find that on the top or bottom of your screen. Look for the word chat, and that will open up the Zoom group chat. And Cindy will be keeping a close eye on those questions. So if you have any questions at any point, type them in there, and we'll definitely cover them before the end, either at the end or along the way, whatever makes sense. So here we go. So vaccines and masks, again, this is the question that people really are curious about right now because the regulations are changing, the guidance is changing. Between all of us on the CertaPay HR team, we pretty much wake up in the morning and start seeing what has changed in the night and send it to each other to say, okay, here's today. And that's pretty much how it looks. So first things first, we want to at least say to you, everything that we say is just advice and guidance based on all the best information we have. We're not telling you what to do. We're only providing you with information, and then how you choose to use that information is up to you. And we want to give you the best guidance we can at the time. So that's our little disclaimer. But again, we're here to help you make the best decisions. So that's our thought there. Right, Tammy, Cindy?
100%.
Yep.
Yes.
Very good. So let's just kind of review some of the things that we know are going on. So the CDC recently has released some guidance that says vaccinated people may not need to wear masks anymore if they are outside of the window of time from their vaccine. So 2 weeks from the second shot of Pfizer or Moderna, or 2 weeks from the single shot of the Johnson & Johnson. So there are some exceptions there for sure, because there are some states where they have not relaxed the mask mandate just yet. In fact, 15 states are still saying that mask requirements are intact. In addition, you have some industries, so hospitals, doctors' offices, dentist facilities. You have some industry-specific places where masks are going to still be required regardless of vaccination status. So the CDC has released that guidance, but there are still exceptions in place no matter what. In addition, the CDC's guidance is just that. It is guidance. As a business owner, you don't actually report to the CDC in any way. You know, you are responsible to follow guidelines from the DOL and the EEOC, OSHA, the NLRB. You have these federal bodies that you do have to answer to. But we don't answer to the CDC, but we do follow their recommendations and their guidance. So something to kind of think about there. And a lot of the issues that we have are connected to the EEOC or the DOL or ADA compliance, ADEA compliance. We have other things that we have to factor into this. And that's why this is a little bit of a tricky conversation. And that's why we're having the conversation. So some of the things you really want to think about are you're actually balancing the risk avoidance with your workplace culture and even employee morale. When I'm talking about risk avoidance, I'm talking about you avoiding risks and exposure as a business owner. So minimizing any kind of discrimination claims or lawsuits or those exposure pieces that put you at risk, having a work comp situation or an OSHA situation or, you know, these other pieces. So these are the things that you have to factor in when you're balancing that fine line of employee morale and company culture and safety, and all of these things have to be factored in. So the conversation isn't as easy as yes or no, right? So, we are all obligated to provide that safe working environment. Under OSHA's general duty clause, that's kind of the main thing. You have to have a safe working environment. So a lot of these things come into play. And what does that look like? We're going to talk about that some more. And the main conversation today is really about discrimination and harassment awareness and equal treatment. So these are the main points surrounding the mask vaccine question. Is, yes, there's a way to do it all, and being very mindful of the discrimination and harassment components is where you're going to protect yourself and have the best outcome. Anything to add so far, Cindy, Tammy?
Nope.
No.
Good.
Okay. So let's say you do decide that you want to have a vaccine policy, or you want to make it a requirement, or one of these levels. The things that you want to think about, and we did this as a separate webinar a few weeks ago, so I'm going to kind of high level this, but the things you want to think about are, the EEOC says, yeah, you can do that. If you want to mandate that everybody is vaccinated in your organization, or you want to have a vaccine policy in your organization, it's okay to do that. You just have to be careful of these other components. And, first things first, you always have to create an exception or an exception possibility. There are going to be people who say, I can't get one for this reason, and you are obligated to provide that exemption. If you're going to make it a requirement or a condition of employment, you also need to provide an exception for people to be exempt from that for whatever reason. And this is where we kind of get into trouble, because it's okay to ask about, are you vaccinated or are you not vaccinated? But the levels of information that you get beyond that are where you start to have the tricky pieces. So now you might have some disability information about somebody, or religious information about somebody, specific medical information. So now how you manage that information is what becomes the critical piece. So going back to that first graphic, yep, the EEOC says, yeah, you can do it, but you have to create exemptions. So now, if you're going to create the exemptions, how do you do that, and how do you follow those kinds of, how do you follow the information and keep it protected for people? And so that's where we get a little bit tricky, and we want to make sure that we always provide any kind of accommodations that make sense, or those kinds of pieces. So let's say somebody has an exemption and they have an exception for one of these exempt reasons. Now you've got to create some accommodations for them. And it could be as simple as providing PPE, or creating social distance in your workplace. Or if you are able, maybe you extend some of the remote working schedules or remote working capabilities. So you want to think about these things when you're creating the policy. And once you've created it, now you have to keep in mind you've got to extend some of those other possibilities as well. And then the other piece is you really can't pick and choose. You want to be very careful to be fair across the board. And so it doesn't matter if somebody says, I'm exempt for whatever reason, then you say, okay, you go into your next step. Well, we've got some accommodations we can do for you. Let's work on that together and come up with a solution. And then it's fair, and
Do they have to prove what their exemption is? For example, if I have a religious exemption, do I have to prove that to you, and how do I do that?
Well, I'm going to let Tammy answer that because I know she's recently dealt with this scenario, but a lot of this information is confidential and you don't necessarily have to do all kinds of proof. It's different with disabilities and medical. So Tammy, tell us about some of your recent experiences.
Correct. So and this is all, of course, based on the fact that you're going to, as an employer, mandate the vaccine. I think if the vaccine continues to be an encouragement, you really don't get into these conversations. But if the conversation and the decision for your business is that you're going to mandate the vaccines, then that opens the doors for the interactive process for reasonable accommodation based on medical and or religious. So there is paperwork that has been provided under the ADA. There's also paperwork available for a religious exemption. If we just take the religious exemption, there really isn't a lot of anything really that the employee can do to prove it. It would just be to check off like a box that's what they're asking for as a religious exemption. And then as far as a medical or disability exemption, then that's when you get into more of the interactive conversation, because you can get and probably should get information from their physician so you have a clear idea of what the accommodation could look like. But that's where then you take the whole conversation to the next level as far as mandating the vaccine. Then you know you're going to get exemptions or requests for exemptions. And then what does that look like? Is it just merely that employees that are not vaccinated have to wear masks? That opens up another can of worms that I'm sure we'll talk about this morning. Or do they get private offices, or can they work from home? And so that's where those conversations have to keep rolling down based on, but where you really want to, just as Rachel just said, those are private, those are confidential conversations, and only those that have a need to know and then are involved should be the only individuals that are aware. We do not want this information going out past the decision makers on granting a reasonable accommodation.
Perfect. So, the short answer is you might need to prove it, but you might not. And it depends what your reason is and whether or not it's a mandate. So again, I think you're going to find throughout our conversation this morning, a lot of our answers are actually yes and no. So states may provide employment protection. So like I said, we have some varying state laws right now to pretty drastic degrees. We have 15 states where mask mandates are still in place. So even the CDC guidance does not overshadow that. The states may have individual laws in place. Another example, in Florida, you can ask an employee whether or not they've been vaccinated, but you cannot ask for proof. So, a different layer there. In Montana, you cannot ask if they've been vaccinated and you cannot mandate vaccines. So we have quite a few varying degrees of answers to all of these questions across the country. So, another thing that we're going to kind of talk about is really your policies are important. Your policies will help guide you. So if you take the guidance from the CDC, the federal guidelines and your state guidelines and use those to create the policies that help navigate this, you will be safe. And then the other thing to do is maybe you make it a policy, a temporary policy for right now. Again, we know things are going to change. It probably doesn't make sense to go revamp your handbook right now because with regards to these pieces, because these pieces are very organic right now. So it's almost like a memo or an amendment or something that speaks to these kinds of conditions for the current time would make more sense than a complete redo, because you'll probably have to redo it again pretty quickly.
Yes, please reiterate that. I get asked that a lot, and I would much prefer to just write you an addendum, a one-page addendum, versus me redoing your entire handbook. So it's a good point, Rachel. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And, just to kind of speak to the handbook question for a quick second here, we do recommend that handbooks are reviewed every year. So it is very good to get your handbooks reviewed at the beginning of the year, somewhere around December or January is a good time. anyway. But with respect to this specific topic or these kind of COVID related topics, we might do kind of a 1-pager, 2-pager addendum to, here's what's happening right now. We want to make sure you're aware of it, acknowledge that you're going to do this. And also, we're going to talk about OSHA here in a second. And OSHA's got some really nice guidelines and information about current safety and providing a safe environment, providing PPE, and following some kind of updated COVID safety measures. And so these are all good things to put down in kind of memo format to make sure everybody is aware of what your expectations are in terms of safety right now. So when we talk about these last 3 pieces, these are some of the things that kind of get you in trouble if you mandate things. So when we talk about, we talk about these boards that we have to answer to when we talk about concerted activity. So if you're mandating a vaccination as a condition of work, it now actually becomes a conversation that is protected under the NLRB. So it doesn't mean that people don't have to follow your policy or get vaccinated if you choose to have that as a policy. What it means is that you can't penalize them or punish them for complaining about it. So if somebody doesn't like your policy and they complain about it, or they're vocal about it in the break room or during work hours or whatever it is, that would be considered protected concerted activity. So just something to think about. Once you add that as a mandate, then that crosses over to concerted activity. That would be, those would be protected conversations. And so safety, as I said, we are obligated to provide a safe working environment under OSHA's general duty clause. So that is something that we always have to think about. Now, there's 2 layers to that when you're now mandating a vaccine, because you could, of course, use the argument that you're providing a more safe environment for your employees, your customers, clients, whatever it is. But at the same time, there's a safety component tied to receiving the vaccination. So if there is an issue where there's an adverse reaction as a result of somebody receiving a vaccination, then that is potentially an issue. Now, it potentially will be more of an issue in terms of your work comp, because now it's a condition of work. So it is a requirement to work there. And if there is an adverse reaction that is serious enough to create a work comp claim, that would be considered a work comp issue. So there are things to kind of weigh out there. And I will also say that at this point, around 80%, a little bit more than 80% of employers are not considering making the vaccinations a condition of work or making it a mandated step to take. A lot of employers are using encouragement language or taking the stance of really encouraging employees to go down that path. And it's a little bit more, when we talk about the safety piece, you're encouraging your employees to do that. Well, that can provide more safety for everybody, but you're also keeping yourself safe in terms of not making it a requirement. So there are so many layers that get added when you're actually making it a requirement. Another thing that could happen is,
Do you find it discriminatory, for example, if a company says, we'll give you a $50 gift card if you get vaccinated, but I don't want to get vaccinated? So do you find that to be a discriminatory practice?
Yeah, that is actually coming up on one of our slides when we talk about that. And it can be, you're absolutely right, Cindy. That could be an issue that we're really going to face because why should one person get $50 and another one doesn't, especially if they actually have a medical exception, or if they've got a disability, or, you know, even an allergy, maybe they're pregnant, maybe there are, you know, there are some other things to factor in here. So if you're incentivizing people, you are potentially creating a situation where discrimination could be the outcome. So yeah, good point. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more with some more details around that. But it kind of leads to the point I was just about to make about safety is, you know, mandating something like this, it could actually set you up for creating a hostile work environment. So you may be setting up opposing teams, you know, I mean, in this country, we definitely have our teams that we support and, you know, stand behind. And so you may create a scenario of vaccinated versus non-vaccinated, and then you've got an issue in your workplace that you are setting up to deal with. So that has to be factored into, you know, your safety issues when you're looking at this as a big picture. And finally here, talking about confidentiality, this is kind of a different ballgame too. And you have to keep information gained through a vaccination program confidential, as you would any medical information. Now, actually finding out if somebody is vaccinated or not vaccinated is not necessarily considered protected information. However, the information that comes with that most likely is. So, you know, you gain additional medical information with those pieces. So you've got to be very careful about that. Any medical information for an employee should always be in a separate file, not in their regular employee file. So any medical information should always be separated anyway. And then if you collect vaccine records, like an actual vaccine record form, there is a specific regulation under OSHA which requires us to keep those forms for 30 years following their termination date. This is a very long time. We do not have any other record keeping requirements this long typically in the HR paperwork arena. So this may be one reason that we don't see people collecting vaccination records. And, you know, it's just a different kind of retention policy that, like, who's equipped to even do that? I mean, maybe now that if everything you've got is electronic and you can set a destroy date from 30 years from when they leave your organization and trust that that's going to happen, you know, maybe, but you know, I would say be careful about collecting that kind of information in the first place, because then once you have it, you've got to figure out how to deal with it properly. And finally, just to mention briefly, the GINA Act, which is the Generic Information and Non-Discrimination Act, is something that, again, isn't typically an issue, but it may come into play here, because if people are providing you with vaccination information, you've got to let them know that you don't want to receive any additional information. And so, you know, these are just some of the things you want to think about before you move into the idea of a mandated process. So good. Any questions with any of those points so far?
No, ma'am. Keep going.
All right. So these are some of the questions that we've been getting, and we wanted to specifically separate it out so we can talk to each one. And I would encourage you to add to the chat any of these points if they come up, and Cindy and Tammy and I will go over them. I think we've got Janet on the line too. So I know she's dealt with some of these questions firsthand in the last few weeks. So we've got you covered right now. If you have your questions, don't be afraid. So first, can we make it a condition of employment? So yes, you can, unless you're in Montana. And other places, you want to be very careful and consider all of those things that we just talked about. And, you know, think about the do's and don'ts and the pitfalls and the benefits and the safety. You know, don't just go into it without thinking about it carefully and creating a very clear policy surrounding it. So yes and no is the answer to that.
But, okay.
Can
I
we
have a
ask-
question.
Yeah.
If you do make it a condition of employment, obviously any new hires moving forward, that would be in play for them. But what do you do about your current staff? I don't want to get it. So are you telling me you're going to terminate me if I don't get the vaccine?
Yeah. So Cindy, again, fabulous question. So what we're talking about here is let your policy guide you. So you have to think about this. So is it going to be just for new employees? Are you going to have a grandfather clause? Are you going to create a policy where you have X amount of time to do that? So these are all things you want to think about for your policy. And then the other thing you want to think about is fairness. And, you know, is it fair to just say only new employees? Do you want to consider what is the timeline for everybody? You're adding exceptions, you're doing all these components, but something to think about here is you may lose employees. So you've got employees who have been with you for many years who may not want to receive the vaccination at this point for whatever reason. And, you know, they may or may not have an exception, but they may not want to receive that. So if you're making it a condition of employment, then also be prepared to lose employees who may not want to do that right now. So you want to think about all of these things and make sure you create a policy that you can follow. So, and that's the biggest indicator when we're talking about a discrimination or harassment issue is, did you create a policy and then only certain people had to follow it? So think about all these things before you cross over that bridge. And, you know, just like Cindy said, you may have current employees who do not elect to receive the vaccination for one reason or another. And so you will put them in a difficult position. You may lose them. They may be excited to go receive the vaccine. It could go any way, but think about any of those possibilities along the way and make sure you're okay with that.
Rachel, this is Catherine. Can I just add something to that?
Yes.
One of the things that you want to consider is your unemployment. So if you do mandate a vaccination policy, and you lose employees, more than likely you will be responsible for unemployment benefits.
Yes. So
Good point. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is a great point, especially right now when our unemployment issues and numbers have gone haywire. So, you know, that is another layer to think about. So if you're setting up a scenario where vaccinations are mandatory and you've been really working hard on your retention and your unemployment claims and all those other pieces, these are all connected. And to Janet's point, you might have people who are leaving, and the reason is because you mandated the vaccine. So, you know, there are going to be some, you know, they would receive the unemployment there. And so those are issues you want to factor into the big picture. Good points. Any more points there?
No, continue.
And so, yeah, so I mean, instead of making it mandatory, again, you know, maybe using language that's more of an encouragement would be a solution to all of it. So, you know, something to think about. So can you ask for proof if somebody has been vaccinated? Again, the answer is yes and no, depending on your state. Make sure you know. I think the answer is yes and no to everything today. Make sure you know your state laws and understand your state's specific guidelines and where you are right now. But the other thing is, if it's an encouragement, why do you need proof? So if you're just encouraging people to do that, you want to, you know, kind of stand back and not ask for specific proof for one reason or another. But let's say part of your policy is you want to know if people are or not, because now you've got different mask guidelines based on vaccinations. So now we're kind of moving down the path to additional questions layered on top of the first question. So Yes, in some places you can ask for proof. But again, like I said before, you want to be careful not to ask for certain types of proof. And maybe you're just asking for an attestation. So if somebody signs a paper that says, yes, I got vaccinated, maybe that's enough. Why do you need an actual vaccination record? Maybe you can get a receipt from the pharmacy or something that shows they did receive it, and then you're not getting vaccination records. And maybe they just sign an acknowledgement that says, yes, I have been vaccinated, and I swear I'm telling you the truth. We do this now with a lot of our things. We do this with policies and with handbooks and with trainings and other things. We say, and on our applications, we say, yes, everything I'm saying is true. And now you've got a situation where you have documentation that the employee is telling you the truth. And if you figure out down the road or find out information different that proves that not to be the case down the road, you have disciplinary action where you can either discipline or terminate based on your code of conduct or being dishonest on paperwork or whatever your policies are surrounding that. So if you get an attestation form, you're really kind of protected twice because you get the information you need, you don't have huge record retention issues to deal with, and you have backup saying the employee is telling you the truth. So this is a good way to go as opposed to asking for some type of medical documentation. And I know,
Hey,
Tammy, maybe you have something to add. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, while we're here, we have a question that pertains to this topic, and it's a good question. If we have an encouraging policy to get the vaccination and are offering PTO to get it, can we require proof to pay out the PTO? So if they're offering additional PTO for me to go get vaccinated, what proof level do they need?
Yeah, so again, it's kind of the same thing. First layer is check with your state's guidelines. And Philip added that point in there. Like we said earlier, you cannot ask for proof in the state of Florida or in Montana right now. And so check your state guidelines. There may be others where you're not allowed to ask for proof, but you can ask for an attestation. You can have them fill out that form that says, yes, I did, and I am telling you the truth. So you can't ask for documentation, but you can ask them the question and have them say they're telling you the truth. So a little bit of a different thing. Same thing with that. Cindy, I think the same thing would apply to using PTO and going to get your vaccination. And then you can ask them too.
They're offering additional PTO, not whatever my normal bucket is my bucket. Heather is offering additional, whether it be a day, 4 hours, whatever the case may be. The company's offering additional PTO. But again, Heather, to your point, yes, you can do that, but the only proof you can ask for, depending upon your state, would be to have the employee sign an affidavit versus actually showing you their vaccination card.
Right, and that's in Florida. So. And going down to the bottom here, we've got incentives. Can we give incentives for the vaccine? Yes, you can. And also, no, you can't. So, it is yes and no. And we're actually waiting for some more guidance on this. And I just jumped to it because it kind of goes with what we're talking about. The EEOC has indicated that even as much as a $100 gift card would be considered excessive and put you in a position of possible discrimination. So we're waiting for some additional guidance. Some of the recommendations we're seeing are simply offering PTO in the amount of time it would take to go get the vaccination. So a 2 to 4 hour PTO bump would be something that the EEOC is recommending as a normal amount of incentive. So we want to be careful to recommend incentives at this point. We are expecting some additional guidance, but, offering incentives to some people and not others. And again, I want to throw out the exceptions. You're offering incentives to people, but what if you've got somebody who has a legitimate exemption from receiving that. They've got a medical condition that would prevent them. They have allergies to certain things where it is a medical exemption. They have a religious exemption. So now you are not allowing those people to receive the benefit. And the reason they can't is because of their religious exemption or their medical exemption. So you see what it looks like here. That's basically discrimination. So you have to be very careful about adding any kind of incentive and having it be a PTO bump that's equal to the amount of time. You know, that's something that people are talking about as, you know, a fair amount. But again, we're still looking for some guidance to come out on this soon. You know, so we want to be careful about that. And also, you know, what do you do when the people are exempt?
I think there's a lot of major employers that are currently giving incentives, but I think they're smart enough to do it before the hammer comes down from an actual policy perspective from the government, whether it's considered discriminatory or not. So I think that there's a lot of them that are taking advantage of the lack of one way or the other at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, we know people are doing a lot of kind of rogue actions right now. So I think taking a deep breath and waiting for some guidance or being careful about it, you know, again, adding some encouraging language around it and being supportive of, you know, what choice people make. I think those are kind of good paths to take right now. You know, I saw an article about Ohio. The state of Ohio offered lottery tickets or entry into a huge lottery if people went to get the vaccination. And I think they had a jump in like 65% vaccination numbers after that. So, you know, and again, every state is kind of taking a different path to success. So we want to, you know, be mindful of all these different things that we have to juggle right now for sure. And, you know, there might be a way to incentivize everybody to take safety precautions or make the best decision for them. You know, think of all these different things that really make your business stronger and better. So I think that's a good way to think about it.
So, Rich, we got
While we're here,
we've got a question from Shelson. Did you want to read that? And then I have another point on what we were just talking
Sure.
about.
Sure. Her question says, what about offering it as an accommodation for people who need the time off to get vaccinated, like we offer bereavement leave when employees need to take time off? Nobody would argue that that is discriminatory. That's a very valid point.
Yeah, and so when you're offering the time off for anyone who needs to go get that, I mean, that's not even necessarily an incentive because you're not doing anything extra. You're just saying, okay, if you want to go get the vaccine, you know, we'll pay you for the time you're doing that. And so something else to throw out here, under the FFCRA, we know that you can get reimbursed if you choose to follow the FFCRA guidelines through the end of September. Is it September or we go through the end of the year now? So
it's
those things are
yes.
Did it change last night? I don't remember.
Right. Yes.
So if you are following FFCRA compliance right now, you know that you can get those PTO dollars, or you can pay people regular pay and get that reimbursed on your 941. So offering that as an incentive to go, it falls in line with current FFCRA guidelines anyway. So where we see an issue is if you're doing something above and beyond that. So not only are we going to say, we're going to pay you for the time to go get the vaccination, but in addition, we're going to add a PTO day on top of your total bank. Or in addition, we're going to give you this $100 gift card, or, you know, anything above and beyond that, where other employees who don't get vaccinated do not have the option to do that. So that's where it's a little bit gray.
So can I add something to that before Tammy makes her point? I just want to say that if anything is provided or gifted like that, if it's de minimis, then we don't have to worry about taxes. But when it starts trending into something that's more significant, then we need to make sure we're taxing it accordingly.
Absolutely. Good point. And then before we left incentives, the only other thought I had is, consider an incentive could be like a wellness credit. You could do some type of wellness plan that was a little more holistic and body and mind motivated, so that you're giving so many wellness points for getting the vaccine. You're giving so many wellness points for, say, a couch to 5K, or for reading a nutrition book or something, so that you're not just focusing exclusively on the vaccination, but you're focusing on the wellness, the overall wellness of all of your associates. And so by offering a wellness credit type of program, then it could be monetized in some form. It could be a gift card, it could be a party, it could be, whatever it is, once again, that works for your organization. But it's a little bit more just holistic in nature, I think, is the best way to view that.
Yeah, that is such a great kind of program. We've seen a couple of different organizations implement this type of safety program and wellness program where, every employee has an option, has the ability to gain 100 points. And there's a list of 200 items that can get you there. So if, vaccinations are 2 points or 5 points, and then regular fitness classes are X number of points, and, certain types of eating and being a non-smoker, and, you can add so many things into this wellness program where everything has point values, and the vaccination just happens to be one of those points. But there are so many other things that people can earn, so that that you can still get to, a full benefit without the points of the vaccination, where you can mix and match in all those items in the wellness program and still get the max benefit. Then that's a fair program where everybody can benefit from a wellness program. And those seem to work very well. And not only that, a byproduct of that, of course, is you have a really healthy staff. Okay, so I think we covered the incentives. And if there are any other questions, roll in, no worries. But let's go back up here to continue to mandate masks, or can you require no masks? So the mask question, again, this goes back to CDC guidance. So they've said fully vaccinated individuals no longer have to wear masks. And again, that's their recommendation. So I saw Ed's question come in kind of along the same lines there. And again, first thing is, what state are you in? Take a look at your state laws. Next thing, what industry are you in? Are you in the medical industry? Do you have, are you working in a hospital? Do you have that kind of a layer involved where mask would still be required anyway? So the next thing you want to look at is if you actually are setting up two separate sets of rules for vaccinated people versus non-vaccinated people. And, you could be creating a situation where there's high risk. So you want to be mindful of that and think about that. So if you do have that set up, one of the things we're seeing is, you could set up a situation where people know, like the people wearing masks didn't get vaccinated, the people not wearing masks did get vaccinated, and now we're back to the teens. And, do we have bullying occurring? Do you have bullying toward people who are perceived to have not gotten the shot wearing a mask? Or do you have bullying from people with strong anti-vaccination ideologies toward people who did get the shot, people who are now not wearing a mask? So you want to be very careful to set this up. And maybe you have people who could not get the shot because of a medical condition. And so those people are wearing a mask. They would be considered exempt. You would be making an accommodation for them, and now they're getting bullied for it. So being very careful about that is an important component. Also, you may have people who did get vaccinated who choose to wear a mask. And so if you're now requiring no masks, maybe a business wants to put forth the idea that things are returning to normal and that everybody is vaccinated or not vaccinated or whatever. They're just saying no masks at this organization. And you've got somebody who's maybe uncomfortable with that and they want to wear a mask. So having the option to wear a mask, I think, should remain intact whether or not somebody is vaccinated. And, being mindful of so many different viewpoints and understanding that, maybe the individual has somebody at home who has a serious medical condition, and making sure they don't bring any illness back to their home would be important. So if you're requiring no masks in your facility and you've got an individual who's very concerned about that, you would be creating a situation for that individual. So I think at this point, again, the answers are yes and no. It depends on so many of those factors. And you want to also be very mindful of, giving people the choice might be the best option there, and really kind of eliminate some of the judgment or even making those preconceived decisions when it may or may not even be accurate. Somebody may be vaccinated and still want to wear a mask. So those are things you want to be pretty careful about. And it should be, easy to kind of take steps to address this. And what we may be talking about is controlling behavior. And so this is where we talk about the discrimination issues and the harassment awareness issues. And so when you want to have specific policies surrounding masks and vaccinations and do's and don'ts and whatnot, I think it's also very important to address behavior. And so maybe add some layers of training, harassment awareness training and discrimination training, and also go over your code of conduct. It's not each employee's business to know whether or not their coworkers were vaccinated. And it's okay to shut down that kind of a conversation. So, going back to the concerted activity, if an individual is complaining about it for themselves, fine. But if you're going around asking other individuals about vaccination status, you're crossing a line. And so now we have the conversations about behavior expectations and code of conduct and anything that has to do with training pieces to help the employees understand where the lines are for them may be an important conversation right now as well. And we know, a lot of the times, even when employers are not making it a requirement, we're still seeing the employees who are going after individual employees or groups of employees based on vaccination status. And they shouldn't know it. They shouldn't know what somebody else is doing in that type of a medical question. So it's okay to tell people, we're not asking, we're not discussing that. It's none of your business. And I know Tammy's had this conversation too.
Yep, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So we did get a question about, can you put only vaccinated people in certain roles? And this is something that, from the HR lens, we want to say, please be very careful about doing this, because again, we're talking about discrimination. And so, let's say you have an individual who says, I cannot get the vaccination because I have a medical situation and therefore I'm going to be exempt. And this person is your number one star in that role, but you say only vaccinated people can be in this role. So now you're setting up a situation where you are discriminating against the individual for a medical reason. And, it takes a little bit to get there, but you want to be very careful about doing this. And if vaccinations are not mandatory in your organization, then you cannot separate people by being vaccinated and not vaccinated. But instead, you want to think about the accommodations. Like, is there something you can do to help this individual succeed in their role, regardless of that question? Does that make sense? All right. Any other questions here? Anything to add? Janet, Tammy, Cindy,
I'm good.
Bueller?
No more questions.
You-
And we kind of covered this already, but just since we have it here, the vaccination card basically just says the date and which vaccine and an individual's name, but still, you know, you can ask to see the card, depending on your state, be careful. You can ask to see the card, but you don't really need to keep it. So you can just maybe check a box, yes or no, after you saw the card, and, you know, don't put yourself under the pressure of dealing with this. Like, once you get the information, what do you do with it? So be careful about that if you do ask for a card. A survey response, just simply asking people the yes or no question, you know, in confidence in a one-on-one conversation, and then going down and creating a checklist of yes or no. A receipt from a pharmacy that shows they went and they paid for it and they got it. I mean, that might be enough proof for you. And again, you don't necessarily need to keep the receipt, but that would give you some information about their status. You know, we're really talking about the bare minimum here. And finally, having the employee attest to it, signing a document that says, I did, and I'm telling you the truth. And so these are a way to get that information about the vaccine status without gaining too much information.
Rachel, but how do you do that fair and consistently? You can't take a vaccination card from one person and then an affidavit from another. I mean, do you do all, it's either, you know, we're going to do only this or we're only going to do that? How do we eliminate so-and-so signing an affidavit who really lied, where somebody else shows you their vaccination card and they did? So now you have two people telling you you're vaccinated and you got the information completely differently.
Yes, so this goes to your policy, you know, write in your policy exactly what will be the determining vaccination status document for you. Either write, you know, we will either need to see one of these items, or we might need the employee attestation, you know, depending on your state or depending on what policy you choose, the one that you will use for everybody. And seeing a vaccination card and seeing a receipt from the pharmacy, they're kind of the same thing. So you could give a couple of choices, or a surveyed response. If you're just going to ask people yes or no, then that's the way you're going to do it for everybody. Or if you're going to have everybody sign that attestation form, you know, so kind of choose the way that is the best for your organization and then follow that for everybody. What were you going to say, Tammy?
Yeah, just a couple things. I would say that you could just create policy based on state law. In states that allow you to collect the vaccine card, you can. I'm a firm believer, just as Rachel said, and that we don't keep the card. I think you check off the box and then it's given back to the employee and it's not maintained, because then you get away from that whole 30-year conversation. But for those states that don't allow it, right now it's Florida. There's several other states that are also indicating the same thing, that they may follow Florida's lead. So, you know, but speaking for today, tomorrow's a different day, just accept the attestation in Florida. I did see a question pop up about, can you ask the dates in Florida? Once again, I would say that the attestation looks something like that. I fully attest that I am 2 weeks or I'm fully vaccinated. The definition of fully vaccinated is, once again, 2 weeks past your last vaccination, be it 1 for J&J or 2 for the other, and then a signature and date. I don't think in Florida we want to specifically get further information. And if other states follow suit, which we expect could happen, we would follow along the same line.
Yes.
So less is more.
Exactly.
Less is always
Less
more
is
right now.
more.
Yes and no, and less is more.
Yes.
We believe in ambiguity today, you know, yeah.
Yes. That's the world where we are right now.
Yeah.
All right. So, we've kind of gone over these, but I think it's really important to understand that, the issue when we're talking about masks and vaccination is a lot easier if we're just talking about those two things, but we're really not. The discussion is about harassment and discrimination, bullying. So when you're talking about masks and no masks and vaccines and no vaccines, please go back through these other pieces and add some training, add some conversations, and make sure that people are treated fairly across the board as we navigate through this. And really, the more you minimize it in the workplace, the better you'll be. If you can kind of take the conversations out of the mix instead of having it be a focus, let's minimize it. Let's get back to where the work is. Let's get back to where your business goals are, and let's kind of let it just kind of blend in. And, just like Cindy said, less is more. So if we can minimize the conversations surrounding masks, vaccines, and whatnot, make your policies that are fair for everybody, and add some training so that people are following your company's code of conduct and treating each other with respect, then it won't be an issue. And we can move through this smoothly and get to the other side pretty quickly.
And don't get into all these what if conversations with your employees. What if this happens, or what if that happens? Because that leads you down a rabbit hole that you can't come back from.
And there are going to be some what if scenarios that come up, and that's what we're here for. So please let us help you. As always, Certipay is here for you. We will help your organization. We have a lot of things that we can implement or help you with policies or procedures. And that is what we're here for. So anytime you need us to help you navigate this, please let us know. Our team is amazing. And everyone on the team, a lot of you already have your own dedicated HR professional. A lot of you are on our payroll platforms, and we are here to help you with any of those pieces. So you are not alone. We are standing right here behind you, and we can help you navigate this.
Absolutely.
So if you have any other questions, send them into that group chat. Cindy's on it. But just to kind of go over it, at this point, again, a better game plan is just to encourage rather than require. And think about all the components that go with that. Write an interim policy if you need to. Ask us to help you with an addendum to your policy, or a memo to follow for the next 30 days, whatever it is, we can help you. And keeping it simple will kind of be the easiest way to go. Be careful not to create a situation that causes you more trouble than you need. So trying to be fair and eliminate any possible discrimination situations is the best course of action. And know your state laws. They are very different right now with regards to all things COVID. So know where your state laws are at this point, and pay attention to them because they are changing. And if you're not sure, let us know. We will help you with that.
Yeah, one thing I would just add is I kind of view all of this as kind of like a marathon, or maybe even longer than a marathon. And there's no reason to react. We want to be in a position where we're acting, that we're watching, we're being very careful and cautious. But just because, another company has made a change or the CDC has made a change, those are all things to be very mindful of. But let's see how it impacts our business. What is the business necessity? And there's no harm in just acting slowly, providing that we're still providing a safe work environment. But let's act kind of slowly, not always rush. I've seen lots of employers. In fact, we can watch it in the news and on the media, and they're constantly having to change because they're reacting quickly. So I think it's kind of smart for us to take it a little cautious. I don't think there's anything wrong with that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Every time there's a change, that's what we do. We take a step back and gather all the information, and let's see what's happening, and then figure out what to do from there. Fantastic. Any questions? How we doing?
Yes and no, and less is more.
That says it all.
We should have just started there, right?
Yes. All right, guys, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you, and we're so happy to have you with us. And look for our next topic to possibly be OSHA and OSHA guidelines and how they have changed and what you can do about safety in your workplace. So we look forward to seeing you at our next coffee break. And thank you very much for your time today.